about this. And so what we're going to do, because of the bandwidth issues, we'll only have one person up at a time. And so that you'll be able to watch. And thank you, Tim Kaczynski and Monica Ford, for joining. As soon as Dr. Paul and Christian come back, I will make sure that there's only one person so that we can continue to stream, because this is such an important topic. So hopefully they'll be back on here in just a second. Here we go. Okay, so here's how it's going to go forward. I'm only going to put one of you on the screen at a time. And sorry, Christian, you're just going to have to talk over Dr. Paul, because he's going to be on the screen. And so I've just been telling our listeners. So back to what we were saying, and so forgive me, Dr. Paul. We've not had this problem before, but we got to stay positive, right?
What an amazing thing that we can have this conversation sitting in 3 different rooms in different states. It's amazing that we can do it at all. So, and that actually ties into the model that I wanted to share with you.
Oh, excellent.
Anyway, we'll address that if you want to.
Please do. Yeah, talk. You have a positivity model, and I want to learn all about it. I mean, it's one, because I want to share some of the things I talk about, and I'd love your input because of your experience. But please share this model of positivity, because you talk about basically what you said, the how does the operation of the equipment of your own mind work, and I think that those may be related. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, before we had our little technical glitch here, Spencer, you were saying that a lot of people get into the mode of blaming their circumstances or waiting for things to change in order for them to have the life that they want to have, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And look, you don't have to change a thing. You have to change a think. Now, the model that you're referring to, Spencer, I've created a visual model for this. And the model starts with what it is. And you probably heard the phrase, it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Which can be kind of annoying depending on who's saying it. But all it means is the way things are. Okay, it's who you are, it's what you have, it's who you're with, it's the way things are going, it's the way things are without changing anything. It is what it is. And I think the most important thing to realize and notice is we turn on our metacognition. So everybody just think about your thinking for a minute. And notice that what it is, no matter what it is, could always be better. Is this true?
Yeah. I mean,
no
I have to fight it all the time. And, I think part of the problem is our physiology conspires against us, doesn't it? I mean, we believe bad news and negative stories before the positive.
Well, we have tendencies and we fall back to our programming.
Right.
When I say programming, I'm talking about like language. Okay. Spencer, you and I were both programmed to speak English by people who didn't even give us a choice.
Right.
Right?
That's so unfair.
I know, right? We didn't get to... But that programming becomes very fundamental and it drives everything else. So even if you learn another language, which I did, I'm fluent in Finnish as well, which is just bizarre, I know, but I had to choose.
Well, what about start? Can you be fluent in starting?
You know what? You can develop fluency in whatever.
Okay.
Whatever you choose. But notice when you do that, when you make that choice, you're up against your programming, which comes very naturally to you. Okay? And it's true if you learn a language or a musical instrument, but it's also true in the way we operate the equipment of our own mind. So going back to the model for a minute, it is what it is. It could always be better. It could always be worse. In fact, can I just share a quick story with you?
Please.
I had the privilege and honor of speaking for the Youth Leadership Conference at the National Speakers Association in Orlando. This was a couple of years ago. And as I'm waiting for my opportunity to take the main stage there, I'm listening to Jeannie Robertson. Uh, you probably remember Jeannie.
I do.
Spencer. She just passed away a little over a year ago, but at 6'2", big Southern accent, she was the funniest G-rated family-friendly comedian on the internet. It was just so much fun. And I'm listening to Jeannie. Okay, I get a text message. Now, if you've ever been in one of Jeannie's programs, you know that you don't pull out your phone and start scrolling through your text. She will. You know what happens, right?
Sure.
She will call you out. Okay, you become part of the show. And so I didn't pull my phone out. It's in my backpack under my seat, but I get a notification on my Fitbit. You know, the little truncated version, and it tells you who it's from, and you get the first few sentences. Well, I glance down at my watch. It's from my sister. And it says, I just wanted you to know that Talon had an accident last night. And then she went on to say, he was on his annual volunteer first responder weekend up on the mountain and slipped and fell off a 30-foot ... Okay, you know what ... means, right?
Whatever you make it up to be.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have the information. It means there's more, but you don't get it here, right? So my mind went on, like you said, Spencer, it's making up the rest of the story. My father lost his dad to an accident when he was only 5. A good friend of mine crashed his plane in Utah Lake a few miles from my office here, leaving his wife and family without a husband and father. And now I'm getting this text about my nephew. So can you imagine the feeling? Can you feel it as I'm sharing the story with you?
Yeah, I'm hearing. I'm like, I need to get on the phone and figure out what's going on because something bad has happened.
Well, I had to wait for Jeannie to finish because if you stand up and leave the room, you have the same conversation. All right. But she was almost done. I slipped out after Jeannie finished and I pulled up my phone. And I'm going to make a phone call, right? But I first wanted to see the rest of the text. So I pulled it up. Let me pick you up where we left off. He slipped and fell off a 30-foot waterfall and broke both of his ankles and injured his knee. They could use your prayers. Oh, I was so relieved. How did you feel when I shared the rest of the story with you?
Definitely relieved. Definitely relieved. And
Right?
yeah, and Tim is listening and has a comment of what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. We put way too much energy in negative thoughts and less on the positive. Look, there's reasons for that. Your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do because your brain has basically 2 jobs: to keep you safe and to prove you right. And both of those get in our way all the time. Okay. But look what just happened as I shared this story with you. Going back to the model, it is what it is, right? It could always be better. It could always be worse. When I shared with you that he slipped and fell off a 30-foot ... what did your brain do? Your brain went into what we call evaluation mode. Okay, there's 2 modes that I'll share with you here today from the model. Evaluation is where we judge. And I invite everyone who's listening today, Spencer and Christian, you guys included, to notice that you're constantly judging, aren't you? Just notice
Yes,
it.
I was judging that, how people are feeling about our show going off the air because of our internet. And then I may be saying a few expletives like crap, and I'm frustrated, right? And and because I'm so excited for today, and I didn't want anything to go wrong.
And we can use that as an example too, because you take what it is, and in your example just now, Spencer, it's a technical glitch, right? Can you imagine anything better than that,
Yeah, we have no technical glitches.
right? I mean, everything goes just like I planned it to,
But
right? Because that's how,
the worst is I never get you back on, and everybody's disappointed.
so could it be worse?
It could.
Yeah, and in the example that I shared, when I said he slipped and fell off a 30-foot whatever, it's like, oh, see, because you can imagine something much better, like no accident, no injuries, right? But then I shared the rest of the story with you where he broke both of his ankles and he injured his knee, but he's not dead, paralyzed. See, you can imagine all kinds of things that are worse too. And here's the bottom line: you can't stop judging. Your brain has to. It's part of the design of your brain. You can't stop it. And notice that judgment or evaluation implies comparison with some standard. So whatever it is, you have to compare it to something. And if you don't have a standard, you'll make one up. And you can always imagine something better or something worse. And we can get to the implications of what that means too, but I'm just wondering where you guys are with this.
I actually have a question for you, Dr. Paul, on this. We've talked before, and I think that example that you shared is such a poignant example, and really shows us, the different forks in the road that our brain might choose to take when we have incomplete information. Uh,
Right.
I I totally agree with everything that you're saying about we have control over our thoughts, and at the same time, uh, it it can be difficult to reprogram this brain, right? It's not like turning on a switch. You mentioned learning language or a musical instrument. Well, it takes a long time to reprogram your brain to play a musical instrument or to learn a different language. And so, how do you kind of keep up the faith and persevere when you're trying to go through this process of reprogramming, for lack of a better term, and don't get discouraged, because it does take, it would be quite unreasonable for me to hand you some sheet music and say, here is a Chopin or Rachmaninoff or something, and have you just play it if you've never played the piano before.
Right. Or ask me to play it on an instrument that I'm not familiar with, right? And the musical instrument is a good example as well, Christian, because what we're talking about here is changing the neural pathways in our brain. Anything you do that is repeated and meaningful gets set up on a neural pathway. And that's because your brain is trying to keep things efficient. So, walking, for example, you don't have to think about how to walk because your brain has created neural pathways. It's a very complicated task. Keeping your balance, shifting your weight. It's amazing that we don't fall on our faces, but you practice it enough, the neural pathways kick in and take over for you. Typing on a keyboard is the same thing. Speaking a language, playing a musical instrument. So what we're talking about here, when we choose positivity above whatever it is that we've been thinking that's causing us misery, the choice is essential, just like it is if you want to play the guitar or the piano. But it's not sufficient, because then you got to hire an instructor and you got to go to the lessons and you have to put in your practice sessions and do the work. Christian, you said that it takes time. The only reason it takes time is because it requires multiple repetitions and consistent practice to design a new neural pathway in your brain. And we know through clinical experience and research that it is possible. These things can be trained and taught. And as you put in the reps, you get better at it. You develop the fluency, just like you would if you were studying a language. It is not easy. These are simple concepts, okay? But simple and easy are not the same thing.
Right. If we go back to your model, just applying what you're talking about now, so we have this evaluative choice basically when we're
Right.
when we're in a situation to think of the worst or the best. It could always be better. It could be worse. So I'm assuming that there's a choice to choose that it could be better. Is that what you're?
Let's address that choice for just a minute, Spencer, because I get some pushback on this. Well, I didn't choose this, right?
Yeah, you don't choose
When we
what
say
happens to you, but you choose how you think about it.
exactly, and notice that what it is all you got. Okay, by definition, I'm
It
not
is
saying
what
it's
it
all you
is.
could. We're getting to that. Okay, it is what it is, right? And it could always. Now my editor tells me to always avoid the word always and never use the word never, but I just said it. What it is always between better and worse. Is that true?
Absolutely. It's in that spectrum somewhere between infinity of worst and infinity of better.
So, according to the model, when we take what it is, or what it is, whatever it is, and you guys, if that for you is a bankruptcy or a divorce or a diagnosis or a dysfunctional team or whatever, okay, we take our what it is, and when we compare it to something better, we feel worse about it. Okay, pure and simple. When we take our what it is and we compare it to something worse, and it could always be worse. We feel better about it.
Is that why we
Just
like
like,
watching soap operas?
you know, it might be. I have the luxury of 30 years of clinical experience where I have seen. You cannot shock me, Spencer. Honestly, I mean, I've seen the goofiest crap you can imagine. And I go home feeling so grateful for my what it is because I see all these examples all the time of how it could be worse. And I'm not even saying, hey, sit around and think about how it could be worse. I'm just saying, look, you can't turn off your evaluation. You are constantly judging and evaluating your version of what it is. Just notice that. And I'm not here to tell you how to think. I don't have that kind of authority. I just want you to see that you are. And if you feel like your circumstances are bad, it's because you're judging it to be bad against a standard that in your mind would be better.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that in that model, and I'm so grateful that you described that to me. So we've got Tim, who's been saying a couple things online here. He says start with empathy before judging. He's saying we take the road of our past, and then he's got one more cognitive and emotional and compassionate. I'm not sure what he means by that one, but really appreciate your comments, Tim. Thank you for joining us. But it is. I mean, I think we do take the road of our past, and that's what you were talking about, the neural pathways. That's we develop habits of how we think, good or bad, about the things that happen to us. And you're so,
And
go ahead.
and those habits become the neural pathways. That's what drive it's our programming. Okay. And once you see it, you're in position to make a choice. Remember, metacognition, thinking about your thinking, creates a space. In that space is where choice exists. And until you see it as a choice, so you don't have.
Yeah. Well, here
What
we
you
are.
get to choose,
Keep going. Keep going. We've got a little bit of breakup here. What do we get to choose? Say that again.
what you get to choose is how you judge it or evaluate it. So notice that you're doing that and that you have some choice in the matter.
Well,
And that's really important.
I've been monopolizing. Christian, do you have anything else? I have because I have lots of questions here.
Yeah, I actually think this what Tim said I think is important. Uh, you know, this start with empathy before judging, and I think it also applies here because if we're not careful, we can say, yes, we are the masters of our own destiny. We're the captains of our fate. And so when we come into contact, or we work with others who may struggle with these choices, or they may, in our minds, be pessimistic or negative, then we are casting judgment on them, because they're not necessarily, quote unquote, doing as good as we are, and making those choices. And so it's actually a question that I have for you, Dr. Paul, is, how do we implement this in our own lives, while at the same time have, as Tim mentioned, compassion and understanding for those around us who may be having a difficult time?
Yes. I think the acknowledgement first, and I'm saying this as a professional psychologist, okay? You are always right about how you feel. Think about what I'm saying here. You are always right about how you feel. How you feel is 100% consistent with the way your own mind is doing the two processes that I'm sharing here in this model. And we've only talked about one of them so far, evaluation, judgment. So going back to Tim's comment too, if we were to exercise compassion and empathy and realize that everyone we encounter is perfectly right about how they feel based on how their brain is processing the information, then maybe we'll have a little more tolerance and compassion for each other as we go through it. The other thing that does is it puts us in position to move to the next phase, which we can go to as soon as you're ready.
Well, I'm ready. I just hope the internet stays. I'm keeping the camera on you, so we use as little bandwidth as possible. So yeah, go into that, and then I'd like to switch a little bit to really how this works in working with teams. But yes, please. What's level 2?
I'm thinking back on what Christian just said too, as he was saying, we toss around these mantras sometimes of, I am in control of my life. I am the captain of my soul. I control my destiny. All these things that are supposed to be motivational, but sometimes create some judgment too. Let's talk about the other process that's going on in our mind, and this is happening all the time too. Just like evaluation, you can't turn it off. And I've labeled it creation. That's going to be up at the top part of our model. And by the way, I know I'm using a visual here. Some people are going to pick this up audio only. I've got a free copy of my book, Portable Positivity, where I explain the entire model step by step, including all the visuals. I'm going to give a free digital copy to anybody who's listening into this podcast today. If you just go to drpauljenkins.com, spelled with a DR, and then do a /teamwork. If you can remember that from this particular podcast, drpauljenkins.com/teamwork. I'll just send you a free digital copy of this mini book where I describe the whole thing in detail. That way you can
Dr.
refer
Paul,
back.
you should probably put it in the LinkedIn comments as well, just that link, because people go back and watch that, and I think that would be great if you want to do that at some point.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put it in there so that you have access to it, because I want you to be able to see how it ties in visually. But if we look at the next process, I call it creation. And we're talking about creation of what is to be. That doesn't exist yet. We haven't created it yet. So the only place it really exists is in our imagination. Okay? The same imagination that we use to judge what it is. But in creation mode, we're using our imagination to lay out the blueprint or the template for where we're going to go from here. And check it out. We don't know what's going to happen. How you doing next week? Spencer, Christian, how you doing next week?
We don't know yet. Next week isn't here yet.
I think
We hope we're
good.
doing well.
It's going to be great. Yeah, I think so.
You think, you hope, you plan, right? But you don't know. You're right. That answer was very accurate. I don't know how I'm doing next week. Now you have something to do with it. Please don't forget that part. This is what creation mode is all about. Okay? But you don't know. So all you can do is imagine or predict or expect or anticipate. It doesn't exist yet, right? Now let's go to the feeling part of this. When you imagine or predict or expect that what's coming is even worse than what you've already got, how do you feel?
Oh no, I don't want to go to next week.
Yeah.
I have anxiety. I have fear. I have frustration. I have, I want to hide.
Spencer, you just nailed it. Okay. This is anxiety. That's 30 years of clinical experience in a nutshell. Think about it. The definition of anxiety is our imagining worse things to come and the feelings that come along with that: fear, apprehension, anxiety. There you go. Now, how do you feel if you imagine or predict or expect that what's coming for you is even better than what you've already got? How do you feel?
I worked for a leadership training development company where we did an exercise, Dr. Paul. I became the CEO of that company, and one of the exercises was that we have just won the California lottery, $50 million. How do you feel? And people had to put themselves in that mode, like, I just won $50 million. And you had to do it with your heart, with your body and your soul. And if you didn't, you didn't pass yourself. But you had to truly believe what it would feel like to win $50 million. I could put myself in that mode if I choose to.
Right. And you do this by choice through the same imagination that you're using to judge everything. But it's kind of like a hammer. Think about a hammer. You know how there are two ends on the head of a hammer? You've got that blunt face on one end for the purpose of driving nails, right? And on the other side is a claw for the purpose of pulling them out. You don't use the claw to pound a nail. And you can't use the face to pull one out. It doesn't work that way. In the same way, we've got this amazing tool in our own imagination. We can always imagine something better and something worse than what we've already got. Always. So notice that. Now we're going to use the right end of that imagination for the right task. When we're in evaluation mode, we can always imagine something worse than what we've got, and that helps us to feel better about what we've got. We don't imagine something worse to put ourselves into anxiety and creation mode and feel like worse things are coming for us. And in the same way, we can always imagine something better. Well, that's not for the purpose of evaluation to beat ourselves up because we're not there yet. It's to guide our beautiful creative minds toward creating, manufacturing, innovating the upgrade. And everything has to be imagined before we can create it. That's the purpose for that end of your imagination.
So now you just piqued my interest. I mean, what upgrade? I just imagined the movie The Matrix, where I get a little thing in the back of my head that downloads new software. Now I can fly a helicopter. Now I can be positive. What's the upgrade?
The upgrade is up to your creative imagination, because your what it is simply what it is. It could always be better. Am I right?
Absolutely. Gosh, Christian, I want to go in a little different direction.
So
And
even
go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, even if you're
Well,
rocking it, even if your business, your team, and your life, and your health, and your marriage, and everything is just awesome right now, which it is compared to something worse, you could still upgrade any of those things. That's what we're going to do in creation mode. And we don't do it because we have to, we do it because we can.
You want to hear something funny? That this Tim Kaczynski actually had one of those $50 million experiences, didn't you, Tim? That means he had to go through that little exercise. So he knew what I was talking about when I said that. That's funny. It's such a small world. Um, so one of the things that I talk about, Dr. Paul, I know we have you for a limited time, and with our glitches, we've come a little short, but I talk with teams a lot, and I know as a psychologist you're very familiar with the work of Martin Seligman and for sure John Gottman out of Seattle. His institute that is really focused on relationships. So one of the things I talk about when it comes into working with teams is the impact that we have, and it's not our intentions, right? That's the thought. Like, we may think we're having a good impact, but it's the actual impact that we're having, and sometimes there's a gap between the intention and the impact. And there is such an
Yeah.
impact on positivity, and positivity is a big word. There's a lot of things that add to positivity. One of the things that I use in evaluating teams there is how productive they are. Okay, so if you look at this quadrant, this is a little different model. So if you look at the left side is low productivity on the horizontal plane, and on the right side. So if you're listening, just imagine a line that's horizontal. Left, low productivity, right, high productivity. But what does it take to sustain productivity? Because anybody can have high productivity for a week, a month, or a year. But to sustain productivity, you have to have conditions on the team where people want to engage at the highest level, and that is positivity. So low positivity at the
Right.
bottom of the vertical plane and high positivity at the top right. So just think about what it's like to be in a low positivity but a high productivity environment. It's burnout. It's just just grind it out, and sometimes we have to do that where it's like the end of the month, um, or you've got a project driven deadline, but you can't sustain it because you'll have burnout. Many managers fear the opposite of that. We're talking about positivity, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, stop with that. We need to. It's all about the numbers. This is a meritocracy, right?" But if you're just highly positive without the productivity, that is also not sustainable. People aren't changing. They're not challenging themselves. They're not growing.
Right.
Low, of course, we're out of business really, really quickly. But where we want to get and where we struggle to get to is that high productivity, high positivity. Can you talk anything? I mean, does that resonate and make sense to you?
It totally resonates with me, Spencer, as I'm thinking about the way we typically or traditionally define positivity is missing a really important element, and that is the creation element. Okay. We think about positivity as, oh, just think positive, things are good, right? And they are compared to something worse. That's evaluation mode. But if we forget about the creation mode, we're not going to stay where we are. Okay. We are not going to stay put here. We are going to move forward into something. And what if I gave your team a challenge to just take a half hour, use your creative energy, work together if you want to somehow make things worse? Now that would be ridiculous, right? And they'll
But we do. I mean, I think about it because if you think about John Gottman, he says you need to have at least 5 positive to every one negative
yeah,
interaction. And if I sit and evaluate, how many times have I had negative interactions or made something worse? Whether it be rolling my eyes or being frustrated or not making myself available or shutting somebody down or talking over them, right? That's a negative interaction, and that's making something worse. Even though I don't think I'm like, my impact is making something worse, and it happens all the time, sometimes unconsciously.
Yeah, and we do it accidentally all the time, but you would never do that on purpose because you want to make something better, not worse. When we get to when we get to creation mode, we have to create something. And I just want you to notice how quickly, when I gave you that bogus assignment to take your team and go make something worse, in a half hour, look how quickly your brain comes up with half a dozen ways you can pull that off. And it wouldn't even take a half hour, right?
Right.
Positivity is not just about thinking positively about what it is. That's evaluation mode. Okay. It's about moving into creation mode next and getting really clear about, okay, here's where we are. What could be better than this? And that's how we define productivity, because we are moving intentionally in this positivity model. We are moving intentionally into a positive upgrade. And that's how I define productivity. So on your 4-quadrant model, Spencer, I'm thinking of that upper right, where it's high productivity, high positivity. That's when we're combining both elements of the positivity model that I have shared with you here, both evaluation, where we feel good about where we are, and production, where we are intentionally moving forward toward that upgrade. And that's what brings the whole team energy. And that's what creates the reason to have the team in the first place, because we're creating so much value for other people in that productivity mindset.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. You answered the question that I had on the tip of my tongue, which was, how do you bring the people on the journey with you, with your team? And so I think what you've said here is absolutely spot on. I'm looking at the clock and I realize that we're up against it here. We've got
Uh,
deadlines, but